ایرانیم می‌گوید خداییم پیام ما روشن است شاه رضا رهبر است
484 protests have taken place in Iran in just the last 2 months alone. In places like Kerman and Esfahan and Tehran. And just 3 days ago, there was a protest of a woman courageously taking off their hijabs and doing the forbidden, dancing with men on the streets in Bandar Abbas. What are they protesting? Religious clerics who pour acid on the face of teenage girls, who execute millennials just for their Facebook posts, who target poets and dancers, athletes and journalists. To paint the picture of Iran over the last 46 years and to properly contextualize our conversation here today, allow me to take you back to the 70s. Disco and bell-bottoms and platform shoes, of course. But I'm also referring to a leading Middle Eastern country on the brink of modernization. Soaring ambitions and innovation, growth and global relevance. That was Iran under the leadership of his father, King Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, better known as the Shah, who had a vision for a nation of greatness, a beacon of prosperity in the Middle East. It wasn't a secret. The Shah of Iran would want to rival any global powerhouse. Infrastructure was booming, education reform was empowering millions, and women were stepping into roles they had never had access to before. International partnerships were flourishing. And all of that was until the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when the Shah was toppled and forced into exile by an uprising fueled by misinformation and radicalism. And it appeared to be overnight. In Iran that once celebrated modernization and global diplomacy became unrecognizable, driven into isolation, its potential stifled. Yet, over the last 4.5 decades, the Iranian people have courageously stood up to tell their world their very clear message, to be free from the chokehold of this repressive, barbaric regime. But the recent political momentum also highlighted something else: the urgent need for a unifying leader to steer the opposition. A recent survey by ERFI found that 80% of Iranians polled prefer Prince Reza Pahlavi to the current regime. And that may be why they are calling his name. They're calling his name on the streets of Iran, in graffiti on the walls. In protests, Iranians are chanting, "Pahlavi, you are our representative." They are calling his name. On social media, the hashtag #YouRepresentMe has gone viral among people inside and outside the country. They're calling him to return to Iran and bring back not just freedom and human rights and justice, but opportunity and a robust economy and a chance for Iranian children to find their own narrative in the world of AI and robotics and technology. Continents away, but the Iranian people see the finish line to freedom, and they're asking this very prince living on the east coast of America to carry the torch. And with that, it is my honor to introduce the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, His Royal Highness Reza Pahlavi. Your Highness, you're sitting here today, thousands of miles away from the Iranian people. How does it feel when you hear them calling your name?
Well, I have dedicated my entire life to be supporting a nation that deserves better than what we have right now. And I tried to keep this torch alight for 44 years. And it's absolutely so rewarding to know that people now have so much trust in you and support you. That's the best reward that I can hope for. And you know, today's Gen Z, a lot of young kids, when they message me, they call me father. What a great feeling to be a good father who is always has the back of his children and will never let them down. And that gives me even more incentive to be more impactful if I can, to help us liberate ourselves from where we are today. So it's not only rewarding, but it gives me even more determination to see it through and liberate our country as soon as we can.
You mentioned Gen Z, and what's amazing is how this statistic that we cite, 2/3 of the population of 80 million kids in Iran today are under the age of 46, meaning they never knew your father. And yet they've taken such an interest in the history and are looking back at their parents' generation with both pride and also frustration. They're talking about an Iran that could be, similar to what we're talking about here today. What's your vision of an Iran that could be?
Well, you know, when Khomeini came back after 15 years in exile, and he was asked the question, what is your feeling returning to Iran after all these years? And he said nothing. Iran never mattered. Whereas today, Iranians want to find a sense of national identity as a result of a regime that has always denied their Iranianhood. And that's the strength of what we are thinking about, a different Iran. And in that sense, I think that the moment is now in front of us, an opportunity for real change. People have experimented with 46 years now of a religious dictatorship. I think they aspire to the very same values of the free world. When we talk about human rights, when we talk about a rule of law that guarantees people putting an end to any kind of discrimination of any kind. And this is quite reachable, and I think the potential is right there. That's exactly the momentum that is now creating an opportunity to achieve that. And what would a different Iran be? A different Iran would be a nation that wants to be part of the free world, that wants to have cordial, warm, brotherly relationship with our neighbors, that is not antagonistic to one faith or one nationality, whether it's the Jews or Israel or the Arabs or the countries in our neighborhood and beyond. Something that completely sets us apart from this regime. And that contrast needs to be understood by the whole world of how different Iran could be and the role it can play positively and contribute to world stability as opposed to everything we have witnessed since this regime has taken over in terms of aggression, hostility, instability, radicalism, terrorism, the nuclear threat, and everything else.
Right. You know, I think speaking of an Iran that was an Iran that could be, I think most people don't know that in 1977, that's just before the revolution, Iran had a GDP of twice that of South Korea, and now today South Korea is 7 times larger than Iran. Obviously, we know Iran has oil and gas and a young population that's talented and brilliant. What are the industries? Maybe you could be more specific. I think. For this audience, in tech and manufacturing, agriculture, what would surprise some people? What are some of these industries that could not only transform a democratic Iran, but really contribute to a world of investors and markets?
Well, I think the advent of much more recent technologies, AI for instance, can help us leapfrog whatever we lost in terms of opportunity cost to the nation. It wouldn't have to take decades to come back to where the world is today and catch up with it. It can happen quite fast. Our country has many needs in terms of refurbishing the existing infrastructure, bringing in new technologies, and that's exactly the kind of elements that could be a rapid process of getting back on track. Obviously, everything is hinging upon the regime not being there any longer, because right now you have a very corrupt paramilitary mafia that pretty much controls every aspect of Iran's economy. No opportunity can really come out of it. Also, the fact that politically speaking, people realize that if there was one time hope for some kind of gradual reform from within, that idea is now dead. Everybody is focused on we have to go beyond this regime to create the opportunity as a result of which we can address all the issues that our country needs.
Right. I think one of the things that really sets you apart from anyone else, and it really, you play the only role here, is that you don't just talk about the day that Iran will be free, you're actually planning for it. And with that, you are actually preparing a Iran prosperity project. This is literally a blueprint of what will be after Iran is free. And I think it was Milton Friedman who said you can't have political freedom without economic freedom. So this actually does that. Can you give us some of the highlights? What was the idea behind it and a sneak peek before the April unveiling?
Well, it has always been on my mind, but more particularly in recent years, that parallel to whatever we need to do politically to bring about this change, not only in the period of between now until this regime is no longer there, but what happens during the transition and ultimately reaching to its ultimate conclusion of having a secular democratic system to replace the current religious dictatorship. But, you know, as the saying goes here, you know, human rights and liberty is like motherhood and apple pie, but does it put food on the table? I think the average person has to understand how will they be impacted as a result? How would their life change? How will the difficulties that are facing today in terms of economic challenges would be quickly remedied as a result of the kind of impact we can bring to the country in terms of investment that would create jobs as soon as possible, have a sensitive approach to areas that are most disenfranchised in Iran. There are certain regions in Iran that the situation is really, really bad. I'm thinking of areas like Baluchistan or parts of Khuzestan and Kurdistan and places like that that could be sort of prioritized in terms of creating immediate impact by bringing in the kind of investments that will provide people with opportunities to, you know, earn money and rebuild their lives. This is, of course, a project that was in my mind, and we started generating some traction around it by, you know, pretty much organizing a first series of experts studying the case, and the first presentation of what we call the Iran Prosperity Project, or IPP, will be this coming April, that is addressing the first phase in particular. This is like a short-term, mid-term, long-term vision, but the first elements will be how can we quickly stabilize the economic situation in Iran, make sure that we have a functioning system while we're going through the political transition. These are all studies that have been done so far, which will be unveiled and explained a little bit how this is going to be happening or what it is that we can expect. And of course, the rest will be the short, mid-term and long-term plans of how we can rebuild our country and bring in all the needed areas, whether it's the existing oil and gas infrastructure to renewable energies, to tourism in general. I think Iran lends itself as the most natural place that could have a very strong, you know, tourism industry, but we need to worry about our environment. We have to make sure everything is taken care of. So there's so many elements attached to opportunities for how Iran could also be a place to invest as the most untapped area, particularly when it comes to American companies who have been deprived of that opportunity ever since the revolution.
I want the first ticket there. So, you talk about reintegration, and I think something that is on the minds of a lot of people is, has this regime, because they're the ones who get all the headlines, has this regime created a phobia about people really jumping in to invest in Iran? What would your advice be, or what would you say about the potential, about the Iranian workforce, about Iran just as a place for business and investment?
I don't think there is a problem with phobia, because as far as I can tell, so many countries that have been host to Iranians who emigrated here became citizens in this country, first generation, second generation. When you look at the talent and the value they bring to society here as contributing in many different aspects to even run many aspects of the countries in which they live, both here and in Europe as well. And I think people who know and probably have had a relationship with Iranians, whether as partners or employees or what have you, see how different and how talented and how creative they can be, and that has nothing to do with what the regime has projected as an image. So yes, you ought to be fearful of the regime, but you shouldn't be fearful of the Iranians. On the contrary, let me give you a little example as an anecdote. I remember probably at least 20 years ago, I'm not sure exactly the date, but it was at the beginning of the President George W. Bush's first term, right after 9/11. There was a conference in Colorado I attended, and it was in Beaver Creek, and it was an AEI conference. And the CEO who was running the whole operation there and the facilities came to me and said, my biggest dream is to help develop ski resorts in your country in the future. And I said, well, how come? He said, well, you know, I was a teenager. I grew up in Tehran. My father was stationed there. And I learned how to ski in Dizin, which was, you know, a very up and running ski resort right just north of Tehran. So if the attitude is they recognize that a different Iran will create these opportunities, I don't see any phobia in that. I think it's more a hope that things will change sooner, and then people of different forms, whether they're Iranians or non-Iranians, can contribute to that. I felt that throughout the years, and I don't think that's a big challenge at all.
You know, there's been a lot of talk about this being the ripe moment, about the stars aligning for the Iranian people to finally get their revolution, to finally get their regime change. Why do you think that this moment is any different, or why do you believe that this is the turning point for the Iranian people?
When you look at two principal factors, one is driven by the economic hardship that leads to a lot of these protests and the situation that people had to deal with. The most basic services the regime has failed in delivering. There are constant and frequent power outages that ends up with having an effect on schools having to be shut down or businesses having to be shut down. It's beyond just management. It's just the direct result of this regime incapability to run the country, and they have no answer for it. The only answer to it is more repression, more brutality, which is the political side of why people are up in arms in protest. They realize that for a regime that promised reform, nothing came through it. They tried it not once, not twice, but 3 times. And 3 generations later, we are in a situation that today, those who may have believed that perhaps one way to address the situation is by gradual reform from within, that idea is now dead. People are beyond that. So it's really a pre-revolutionary stage. It was certainly emphasized when Mahsa was murdered, and that triggered the Women Life Freedom movement. But since then, there have been also continuous campaigns, and it has its ebbs and flows, of course, which is why we are reaching out to the free world and say, listen, we are out there fighting empty-handed against a very brutal regime. When is it that you're going to realize that your best bet is to invest on us, the Iranian people, as your true partner and the alternative, as opposed to hoping that you can negotiate terms with a regime that simply cannot coexist with you? I've been saying for the past 40 years that the biggest flaw in foreign policy of many Western governments, particularly in Europe, even the United States, has been that their strategy or policy was based on a false expectation of behavior change by this regime. And I kept saying, look, the DNA of this regime simply doesn't fit your expectation. They are what they are. If they stop doing what they're doing, they're no longer this regime that tried to use Iran as a launching pad to export an ideology across the world at the expense of the Iranian people. You cannot come to terms with them. You cannot rationalize with them. You'll never be able to come to a real deal. In the meantime, the Iranian people have been pretty much abandoned as an alternative. Now I see a shift of opinion. Now I see that the world is beginning to catch up to where Iran and Iranians are. And I think they begin to realize that the ultimate solution to get rid of multiple issues that is a threat to the world, whether it's the existential threat of Iran against Israel with a nuclear threat, or terrorism, or radicalism, or every other aspect of instability, it's all tied to the regime in Tehran. However you hash it, this regime is the ultimate problem and it needs to go. Not because some foreign government says so, but because Iranians are asking for it. And our message to the world is, listen, why don't you become our partners in this? We are not asking for your pity or lip service. We actually think that the difference will come when you decide to finally couple with your maximum pressure on this regime, you add a component of maximum support, helping people better orchestrate themselves in the campaign of resistance and protest that could culminate in massive labor strikes that could paralyze the regime and ultimately force it to collapse at the least cost to the nation. But guess what? As a result of these two factors, we can then start expecting maximum defection. Why is maximum defection important? Because A, it minimizes the last-minute resistance of the regime against its own people. It is a controlled implosion, and you feel the void post that. It's not going to be mayhem as what happened in Iraq after Saddam Hussein's fall. And that's the part that we can demonstrate that both on the civilian side, even on the military side, there are many elements that could be part of that transition and survive regime change and maintain stability during the transition, which is very important, except for those who have their hands soiled with the blood of the Iranian people who will have to account for it in courts of law in the future. So that's really the trifactor that I look at in terms of how can we get from where we are now and get there. And parallel to that, also have a plan of how will that contribute to creating the opportunity to then build a healthy economy, a strong economy that goes hand in glove with a stable governance. You need to have an open economy to have stable government. Without stable government, you cannot have a free economy. The two work hand in glove, so we need to look at both sides of the equation at the same time.
It sounds like the plan is set. They look to you as a leader. The sanctions are there right now. We have a maximum pressure campaign. What are the challenges that could potentially get in the way of regime change in Iran right now?
Well, I mean, again, once that shift of attitude by the outside factor helping out. You know, I always said to fellow Iranians, we cannot rely on anything other than our own resolve. We shouldn't count on any foreign government. However, it's obvious that if we did have more direct support from the free world, our task will become easier, will happen sooner, at a lesser cost to us. The whole point is for the world to realize that this is a win-win proposition that we're making, that a change in Iran will bring immediate impact in the region and beyond. It's a total game changer. There's no downside to it. The only loser in this will be the regime that is now ruling us with terrible repression. Anything short of that will not be in the best advantage of the free world and the Iranian people. That's the commonality of interest there. That's where they have to pivot from a strategy of either appeasement or trying to cut a deal with a regime that has only been incentivized to do more harm as a result of this appeasement approach. Case in point, in the previous administration, over $150 billion worth of money that the regime should not have had access to helped them, not the starving people in Iran, not building more school or infrastructure, but funding their proxies in Lebanon and Gaza, Hezbollah, Hamas. I don't think October 7th was an accident. It was somehow part of that thing. Meanwhile, Iranian people are getting arrested and tortured and imprisoned and executed. And what has been gained as a result? Right. That needs to change. This thinking has to be modified. So I think Iranians are proven the fact that they have fought the fight as bravely as they could. They're still out there fighting. But now I think there's an alignment of the planets. Now we truly have an opportunity in front of us for the next year or two. That window is not going to remain open forever. But this is an absolute golden opportunity to take advantage of it. Why? Because first and foremost, the Iranian people are fed up with this regime. They're tired of this. They want change. And they're asking for all the support that they need. And my job is to not only try to mobilize our own diaspora to be of help in that, having more influence on foreign governments to align themselves and their policies to the ask of the Iranian people and play their role in that. But all of these factors can expedite the process. We don't have to wait for far too long. This is an opportunity not to miss, and this is what I hope we need to all try to convince the world that this time you have been betting on the wrong horse all along. Give the Iranian people at least once the chance to make the difference, something you haven't done for 46 years and counting. We need to do that now.
Well said. We have a few minutes left. I want you to take this opportunity to speak to the Iranian people directly, those who are calling your name, whether inside the country or outside. What is your message to them as they're looking at this moment of hope for a better day for Iran?
If I were to sum it up in a few sentences, the first thing I would say is that, look, we had done this before. It won't be the first time. But we can do it 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, even better. Number two is, let's start moving the needle from hope to belief. Don't tell me we hope for a better future. Start believing that you can actually get it done, because we can get it done. We have tremendous amount of talent. We have tremendous amount of ingenuity. that is only not utilized because this regime will not allow it. We have as much national resources that any country could hope to have to put us in the right equation, in the right position. The sky is the limit. So we have to start believing that it can be done. And my job is to make sure that they start having more faith into themselves. It's been hard. I know there's a tremendous amount of loss of faith or trust because they've been so badly dealt with. And, you know, at least they trust me in this. So I'm telling them, believe we can make it happen. And the world needs to believe that we can make it happen. These are the most important element of my talk to my fellow compatriots because they've proven it. They've proven it that the minute they get the right opportunity, they will thrive. And this is the guarantee to the whole world that a different Iran will let its people flourish and contribute not only for the betterment of their lives and their fellow countrymen, but will have an immediate and lasting impact to the entire world. We are a nation of peacemakers. We want to get rid of the warmongers that have detached us and kept us away from the free world. And that's the game changer here.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you. I hope that your father's vision for a greater Iran and your vision come to fruition for a better day for the Iranian people. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all. Thank you.